turn to Dr. Shuruq Naguib, who is a Quran scholar, who's with us online. Shuruq teaches at Lancaster University, and she has wide interests in Quranic exegesis and in both contemporary and classical or traditional studies. So I won't take up her time. Shuruq, it's very good to see you again.
Thank you so much. And just let me make a disclaimer. I work more on tafsir studies, so of course I'm working on the Quran as well, but it comes through my interest in exegetical, the history of exegesis and exegetical studies. Okay, I have to say that I'm honored to have been invited, and I have enjoyed reading the book immensely. I found it a rich, engaging, and in-depth study with contributions on several levels. I'll share some of what I think are contributions of the book. The first one is the obvious study into the theme of conciliation. And as Tom was speaking, I also had a similar question, although coming from a different perspective. Why use the term conciliation in English? And I'll come back to that maybe later. But we get to understand a lot about the theme of conciliation as the book attempts to provide a data from the ground up using structural analysis of the Quran to show us what conciliation could mean if we read the Quran in this particular way. So this comes at a timely point because we've had so many studies on war and conflict in Islam and in religion. And this marks a long-awaited shift, as the author himself recognizes, to thinking about conciliation and conflict resolution. The study as such begins from outside the text, but also provides references to why conciliation is important within the text and its history. So, for example, the lexical term sulh or salaha is a starting point because there is a connection or there is a connotation of reform, conciliation, as well as other meanings. Historically, there's the reference to Sulh al-Hudaybiyah in the biography of the Prophet and with Quranic references. I have to say that I found conciliation to be a fascinating theme, although I did think about several other themes that could have been foregrounded as the basis of the same study. The lexical anchor, I have to say, is not always used as evidence of relevance to the theme of conciliation. So the author has done more in-depth analysis of the Quranic material to see what other themes, sometimes not lexically linked, and sometimes are contextually indicative of conciliation, such as the story of Joseph in chapter 12, or the references to the prophetic peace treaty with Quraysh, Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, as it's called in chapter 48. These contextual references to conciliation without the lexical linkage are also included in the study. So as such, it's a very comprehensive study that begins with the heroistic theme of conciliation. And then another contribution is developing a thematic analysis of the Quran that does two things. For those interested in Quranic studies, it brings together the linguistic interest in textual coherence and the literary interest in thematic analysis of the Quran. This allows the author to make a compelling contribution that goes against much scholarship, which has argued that there is a major rupture from the Meccan to the Medinan period, whereby the Meccan revelations reflected a much more conciliatory approach, and the Medinan revelations mark a shift to belligerence. So in that sense, the author does make a compelling case that conciliation is pervasive in the Quran, providing much evidence from different surah groups, and in that sense, the study is methodologically rigorous. Moving on to my final, this is not the final one, but this is the third one of the contributions in my view. And that is introducing a place for the tafsir tradition. As I said at the beginning, I'm a tafsir scholar, more or less, or interested in the history of tafsir. And it has been one of those, let's say, configuring scholarly positions to regard pre-modern tafsir as irrelevant to contemporary understandings of the Quran. It's a piece of history. It's something to understand and to study as part of the intellectual history, but to draw upon it in order to develop and construct a comprehensive understanding of the Quran today in the contemporary world has often been a point of controversy and has led to the demarcation between traditionalists and modernists, or those who just focus on the Quran and those who still are traditionally committed to tafsir. So I think this study breaks down that polarization by drawing on the Islahi Farahi school, marrying the Islahi Farahi school together with the linguistic approach to coherence and thematic analysis. The study also brings in Ar-Razi, a 13th century mufassir, into the study as a counterbalance to the Islahi Farahi school, as providing a classical input that's helpful at the grammatical and rhetorical level. So this I found also fascinating. So 3 major contributions which have inspired me to develop the following reflections. One of my reflections is that the book tells us more about Islamic ethics than just the theme of conciliation. And let me give you an example. In the first chapter, interrogating group 1 of Quranic chapters 2 to 5, the author provides us with a paradigm to understand how the theme of conciliation evolves from through chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. Conciliation emerges in chapter 2 as anchoring an important esoteric meaning, and that esoteric meaning is then developed to reflect on administrative frameworks or exoteric frameworks of conciliation at the level of management, managing conflicts. So Chapter 2 and Chapter 4 give us specific social contexts such as unlawful killing, inheritance, marriage disputes, and then the conciliation theme is further developed into thinking strategically about unity of humanity. This begins in Chapter 2 of the Quran and then is sustained in chapters 3 to 4 and finally 5. So the point is that there is a thematic paradigm that evolves out of this chapter group. So the build-up in terms of the micro to the macro level development of the paradigm, moving from the individual level, the inward individual level, to the outward individual level, externalizing conciliation from within to society and then to humanity, is a thematic, not just a thematic unity through these surahs, but rather there's a development within the theme, within this cluster. And this made me think about thematic development and transformation in literary analysis, which also draws on music theory. So one of the problems that we deal with in Quranic studies when doing thematic analysis is the absence of demarcated thematic content. So through this book, I have come to recognize that rather than having particular themes that are more important than others in the Quran, one thing that has emerged strongly from the analysis is that the different themes are interconnected. And as one theme ebbs and the other flows, this kind of augmentation and diminution, to use music theory terminology, allows the themes to unfold as well as be interconnected. So, for example, the permutation from the inward to the outward levels appears to augment and expand certain themes in the latter iterations. For example, verse 177, which Shafi mentioned on Bir, references forms of worship. This verse, which is about the inward, uh, is later augmented in verse 224 on birr, taqwa, and islah, which is in a cluster surrounding marriage and divorce. So the theme uh, of inward conciliation unfolds within a cluster about social conciliation. So to sum up, this takes me to think about not thematic unity, but multi-thematic matrix or thematic interconnections. And the connections are highlighted throughout the book by the author. So thematic cohesiveness, as the author recognizes, is not developed in a linear fashion. Rather, the book talks about the multiplicity of connections, not along one progressive line of thematic development or transformation. So yes, there is thematic development and transformation, but this should be envisaged more as a matrix of themes intersecting and overlapping at particular points in the text. So the micro-level textual linkages of Bir, for example, which has already been mentioned, is connected with two other themes lexically in the text. There is also the microtextual linkage in the wider structure of the Quran. For example, the verse 30 of chapter 2, where God announces the appointment of Adam as a vicegerent. And here we see in this narrative of origin a connection between the notions of corruption, fasad, where the angels comment or preemptively associate humanity with corruption. This initial reference to or linkage between conciliation and fasad contextually in chapter 2 is later linked to another surah group, chapter 6 and 7, where corruption and reform as part of conciliation are strongly linked with prophethood or with the narratives of two prophets in these two surahs. So a further level of connection in chapter 5 is inferred from context, whereby intermarriage with the people of the book and making their food lawful is perceived or is read by the author as a powerful indication of conciliation because this promotes mutual good relations. The move from the textual to the contextual to inferring from the wider or the global structure of the Quran provides the evidence for seeing how conciliation unfolds as a theme throughout the surah groups. But as I argued earlier, it is also a case study for how the different ethical themes of the Quran are interconnected. This is, in my view, perhaps a more powerful conclusion to argue that it's not the evidence doesn't only provide us with a case of thematic cohesion or coherence. Rather, it gives us evidence that the ethical world of the Quran is conceptually cohesive. So rather than thinking of thematic cohesion based on textual cohesion, we're also seeing here a conceptual cohesiveness in the ethical vision of the Quran. And this might sound, this might resonate with Izutsu or sound to echo some of Izutsu's conclusions in his two seminal studies on the semantic structures of ethical concepts of the Quran. But what I think Shafi does, and I think I hope that my reading has done the study justice, is go beyond the semantic to think about the textual, contextual, and thematic development and transformation to unfold the different ethical themes and how they might relate to one another. And this, I think, perhaps the theme of conciliation is a helpful theme, but if we had chosen ihsan or bir or perhaps some other uh, lexical term, thinking about another ethical term, perhaps similar elaborations of Quranic ethics of conciliation would have also emerged through the other terms. So this is, in my view, a study about conciliation, but also about the relational ethics of the Quran, in which the cultivation of values can only happen in relation to others or to the divine. There's no cultivation, there's no ethical cultivation without a relational, a form of relational agency toward humanity or toward the divine. And in that sense, I feel the study has provided a persuasive argument, not only for the thematic coherence, but also for the ethical coherence. Thank you. I hope I haven't overrun.